Jess has worked with directors, owners, and SME service-based businesses to create and implement marketing strategies. I connected with Jess a few weeks back and loved our conversation so much and thought she would bring another fantastic viewpoint to the podcast. Jess has worked both agency and client side, as well as being the conduit between agency and clients. So there's a heap of insights into how agencies are falling down and what they need to do to improve, whatever your size of agency. Jess, thank you so much for joining me today. Do you want to just give a quick overview of your experience?
Sure. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. What a lovely chat that we can have, and hopefully it'll be useful for our listeners. So in terms of my experience into the world of marketing events, started in London for advertising and experiential agency called The Bank, and that really opened my eyes as to the kind of type of stuff that could be done. So I was involved in some really cool live activations with a very well-known beer brand. So yeah, that was kind of my very, very early career days. From that point, I went to work in the sporting industry, so sailing events. The next kind of jump in my career was going to work for a global agency which was headquartered in Geneva, and I worked my way up to become client director, which I absolutely adored. It was a fabulous job, had a big team, spent a huge amount of time there and learnt loads, did some really massive projects, some really taxing projects, and loved every second. So then I went on to have my gorgeous family, and I decided at that point I didn't want to do lots of international travel, wanted to be the primary carer. So I kind of came out of the workforce in a full-time basis and took a little bit of time out to do maternity leave. And then thereafter have gone into the wonderful world of freelance and consulting. So now I kind of draw together all of my experience from lots of different things and work with businesses in a kind of fractional capacity to help them do what it is they need to do better to grow. Does that give you a good enough overview, Jo?
It does. You've had a very varied life and varied work experience. So one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the podcast actually is based on the fact that, you not only have you experienced client side, you've experienced agency side, you've also been involved in running your own business as well. So you've got a really good understanding and viewpoint of some of the challenges that agencies face and also some of the issues that clients see when working with agencies as well. So if you think back to working agency side, can you reflect back on your time there and sort of think about what you would have done differently now, understanding what it's like being the client?
Yeah, I kind of went into the agency setup having also kind of been a client as well, but to a smaller capacity. So I went into an agency wanting to learn to be the very best I could be. I wanted to get promoted. So I wanted to do a really good job. And luckily I had people surrounding me to learn from who were all fabulous at different things. And I think what my main takeaway was, it's all about being that trusted partner. You're not a supplier, you're a partner. You should aim to be a partner to your clients. And it's about, adding value and probing, being curious, trying to get to the nuts and bolts of what they want to achieve. So I think, some agencies can be a bit guilty of, this is our service, we do venue finding and websites and blah, blah, but it's not at the strategic level of why that client's doing that piece of activity in the first place. So I think that's the one thing that maybe some people are wired with a more strategic brain than others, and I probably fall slightly into that camp, although obviously you learn a lot as you go through your career. But I think it's all about being a trusted partner. And if anyone who's working agency side, my one tip, I suppose, to satisfy the client is to make them look good and to make their job easier. And ultimately, if you can understand why they're doing a project, event, whatever it might be, marketing campaign, and how their role fits into that piece, then actually you can understand quite quickly and quite clearly how your agency can provide value. So I think one of the challenges, working agency side is when you have a client team with lots of different stakeholders, right? So, I might have a PA to a CEO who is my client when I'm working for an agency, but the ultimate stakeholder is the CEO. But then there's also loads of other stakeholders who I have to answer to as an agency, who might be their finance director, it might be their procurement lead, it might be their creative director, it might be their, for example, if it's a pharmaceutical client, it might be a medical director. So someone very scientific and very specific in their job role. So it's kind of bridging the gap in terms of what the expectation of that agency to deliver on is, but then the personal piece in the middle. So to make it relatable and to kind of establish that trust, and that, ultimately as a client, you want to be able to go, oh, I just need to phone my agency person if that's me. You want them to go, oh, right, I just need to pick up the phone. They'll sort me out. They'll answer my question. And they become that person who you can bounce off. So, yeah, it's a fine balance. But then obviously you've got to make money as an agency, and it's how you manage that. But we'll come on to that bit a little bit later.
And you mentioned earlier that piece about value for clients. Agencies need to show more than what they're commissioned to do by adding that extra value. Where do you find that agencies should be focusing to add in that extra value?
Oh, this is such a big question. So, and this is something I've touched on actually in the last couple of weeks on a project, is what is an agency's point of difference? Now that's a whole other podcast for you right there. But most agencies, they are relatively similar in terms of what they sell or what they tell their clients they can offer. But actually, it's generally down to personality and to deliverables and to being, having credentials in a certain sector. So, for example, if you're an agency with massive credentials in automotive, then you're going to attract more clients in that sector because you can wax lyrical about all of the deliverables you've achieved, how you've helped your other automotive clients build their business, grow, etc. But I think it's all about relationships, isn't it? And it's about ideas and that stretch. And I think if you just do A, B, C that you've been asked to deliver, then you'll probably do a great job and you'll get that job. But long term, everyone wants more. Everyone wants more value. Everyone wants that little piece extra. So what does that look like? Totally depends on the client and what their business is, but it has to be, it could be from different angles. It could be, have you thought about doing this event, which you've never done before? This is a brand new concept, but it's our idea. We could do it together. And then that becomes a partnership rather than a supplier-client relationship. It might even be little things like remembering your clients' birthdays, remembering their interests. We know about the personal selling piece of relationships and, golf days and all of that, kind of going to hospitality at Wimbledon or things like that, which are obviously much more restricted now, when the Bribery Act came in. But ultimately they work because they get, two people who are trying to do a business transaction in a room, in a relaxed environment where one of them, who is the decision maker, is very relaxed and comfortable because it's something they love. So I think, little things that help you as an agency person position yourself with your client as not only the trusted person, but also the person who gives a shit and who actually remembers the little things about them, that really stands out. So yeah, that's one probably very fluffy answer to that question.
I don't think it's fluffy at all, actually, Jess. And I think it's a very valid point. And, you made the point of you could do your project incredibly well, which is great, box ticked, but it's the differentiator, isn't it, from you to another agency? It's the client servicing piece. It's the customer relationship piece, isn't it? It's making sure that you do understand your client's business needs and you're responding directly to their needs rather than the service that you want to push to the client. It's understanding them as a client, understanding what drives them. As you mentioned, if you understand or know or have found out that they like golf, great environment to have a conversation with them in a relaxed environment. And those face-to-face meetings are absolutely invaluable to open up, relaxed conversations with clients. And you get such a better perspective on the future of the business, what they're looking for. Are there any challenges coming up that you might not be aware of?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I completely agree. And I think one thing that I've had experience of in my career so far is that relationship piece is often pitched at different levels. So if you're an agency and you're working on a massive, massive project, the likelihood is your client contact isn't going to be one person. It's going to be a similar scenario to what we've talked about just now. So it might be, you'll have a marketeer there, you have an ops there, you might have a C-suite person or representative there, and they're all vying for their different bits in that project because they're all responsible for different elements. Ultimately, as an agency, you need to do it all. But I think one important thing to note as well is that those relationships can't just come from the decision makers. So it can't just come from the agency's MD and the client's budget holder. It needs to come down to absolutely every single level of that operation and who's involved to deliver that project. So, might have an event assistant, you might have a travel coordinator, who are kind of massively important people in the mix. So from a relationship perspective, it's the kind of the accountability of the agency to match personalities as well as skills to that client team so that you can forge relationships at every single level. Because then long term, both for the agency and for the client, not only does the trust then get really embedded, but if someone leaves the client's team to work somewhere else, or even, dare I say, go agency side, your agency is more protected then in terms of the long-term business from that client. So, and we see this all the time, you get people who work for an agency, work on a really juicy project for a nice client, and they get poached, so they move across, and then that agency loses that piece of business. And that works the other way around as well. So I think, some agencies are quite exposed to that risk when the relationship is just at the board level and not at every single level down. So it's kind of explaining and embedding that culture in your agency that, client service really, really matters, and teaching those people at every level to kind of not necessarily have a strategic role, but to kind of understand the reasons behind why every piece of delivery is happening, because then it kind of cuts through the noise a bit more.
All valid, very valid points. So when we flip it over to client side, what do you think agencies fail to understand when it comes to their clients?
I understand how agencies make money, and every agency is based on a different model. Some are open book accounting, they charge a fee. Some are purely on markups. It completely is different. But I think certainly now the appreciation of the sophistication, I suppose, of client side people, agencies need to know that their clients know what they're on about. And it's not a question of just pulling the wool over their eyes and saying, we'll go on a retainer, or you can pay us this chunky fee for X, Y, Z. And, it's about being transparent, and all comes back every single time to adding value. So, when I've worked client side, it's a very strange and very different position to be in, because you're the one who is the budget holder. So you place business with an agency, you have to trust in the fact that they're going to do a good job for the money that you're giving them to do that job. So ultimately, you're going to pick an agency that goes the extra mile, gives you more value, you relate to more, have better credentials, whatever it might be. They might have that little way of working. They might give you a kickback if they achieve a higher amount of negotiated savings because of their buying power or X, Y, Z. There might be lots of different nuances there, but ultimately it's about adding value. So when I've been client side, the agencies that I've chosen to work for are always the ones who display those traits. So it's a given. They're good at what they do. They're going to deliver what I need them to do, whether that's a service or a physical thing. Like the quality is high, or the quality is as per what my budget is. But ultimately, it's about them helping me out and making my life easy. I've worked with agencies in the past who are not easy to work with, and that's not fun. Really quickly, if you're working client side, or equally, if you're working agency side with another agency, those situations working in marketing events can be very stressful. It can be very deadline driven, obviously, the nature of what it is. And if you work with people who kind of get it and who help ease those pressures, then you're going to want to work with them again and again and again. If you work with who are like, well, that's not in our SOP, or this is out of scope and I need to speak to commercial and that's going to take me 3 days to get a quote back for you to approve. There's a real fine line of getting the job done and talking about it. But obviously from an agency side, you have to balance that really carefully on the commercial side of things, which again, I think we probably talk about in a bit. So yeah, for me, it all just comes every single time, comes back to quality delivery, relationships and trust. And that's from both sides, really.
And I think it must be interesting as well. I mean, I experienced this when I went client side. When you're client side, but you've been agency side as well,
Yeah.
you kind of can see through the bullshit as well with
Yeah.
agencies, aren't you? It's like, well, no, I know that. I understand what you're talking about here. Let's just kind of cut that and let's just work together to find a solution or move forward with something, or know that this will pay back down the line for you if you support me here. But yeah, it's definitely those of us that have worked agency side and then going client side, you definitely feel differently when you work with agencies, don't you?
You do. And I think, yeah, you absolutely do. And I think one challenge I've kind of come across, probably both agency and client side, is agencies that I've worked with that I'm like, well, that you've got a leadership person in the agency who's really commercially driven, but you've got an operator who has just spent, really broken their back to build that relationship, but they're almost hampered by the leadership's attitude to working with their clients. So they might be, you have your operator who you build up a really nice relationship with on a project that you spent 6 months working on. And they're like, yeah, we'll do that extra bit for you. Don't worry. We're not going to charge you extra. Those kind of micro decisions. Whereas if you have a structure within an agency where the leadership is constantly, no, we need to speak to commercial. No, we need to requote you. No, it's actually really, really stressful, because not only does it slow down progress massively, quite quickly it can turn you off from that agency and feel like, it's just another invoice, more money, more spend, which there is a time and place for that. Always there is. And you get clients who totally take the piss. And scope creep is a real challenge, but it's how the agency's leadership manage that in a way that keeps the client feeling valued and that they're being really well serviced. And that's a bit about boundaries, isn't it, I suppose? And again, down to relationships and those big conversations when you're first working with a client as to whether you've worked with them for 10 years and all of the stuff that goes on in between.
Yeah, I think part of that is also comes down to the leadership trusting the client services team to know when they can sit there and say, we have been putting in boundaries in place, but I really do think that if we did X, Y, Z right now, just as quick job, free of charge, we're going to open up a different opportunity over here. Or if we look to adapt the project because that's what's happening, we're going to get visibility from these people over here. And it's sort of trusting in the client services team to know their clients well enough to be able to know and listen to them, to know when they're saying, actually, I think this is what we should be doing, this is the right approach with this client, and it's going to play dividends down the line.
And that also comes back to the structure of the agency, doesn't it? So how that team works, who the ultimate responsibility for the client is, for the business development of that client, for the sales. And ultimately, one of the things, I had an amazing boss when I was agency side, and he was really encouraging. He stretched me, put me on projects that I knew I could deliver really well, but he gave me the autonomy to kind of fuck up once in a while, because when you feel like that, you're like, I never want to do that again. And actually, because I was allowed to do it in that way, I became a real stickler for various things, which then in turn allowed my career to progress quite quickly. And then as a result, all the people that were reporting into me, I'd teach them in they all have their personalities, everyone's different, but I kind of tried to teach them that the things that I'd learned were really important. And I think there's a lot to be said for people who work in leadership positions in agencies, starting from the very bottom and working their way up, because they've been through all of those scenarios. They've been the, person on the end of the phone when they've got a client who's really pissed off, and they kind of understand what that feels like, and then they can support their team, who are those operators, to operate in a slightly more strategic way, a bit like we're saying, and understand, what the client needs, and get it right, because that's really important. It's not just, oh, we've got a PO, we've got a contract, brilliant, crack on, and then the leadership of that agency just steps out. Because then if the operators aren't on board with what was pitched, then what's delivered might be very, very different, in which case the client's not happy and they walk away. So it's kind of that whole thread going through everything really is really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's another podcast in itself, talking about how things are sold in the sales process to then how it's being handed over to the client service team or the delivery team. But I think what was interesting for me there that you were talking about was this mindset of bringing people up through the agency. I'm a massive advocate for that. I'm a huge advocate for businesses to empower their teams to embody their business, to be able to speak really competently about the agency, their products, their services. It shouldn't be left to senior management to be able to do that. And I think that when you have people that are junior and they have worked their way up, which is what I've done in quite a lot of my agencies, it gives you such an invaluable insight into how the business works. As you mentioned before, you listen to people who's more senior than you absorb all the information that they're saying. You understand how to speak to clients. You learn so much when you are in a agency for a while and really understand them. I mean, I could easily have spoken so well and so competently about the agencies that I worked in, because I became the agency to a certain degree. And I think that comes from when you invest in your people and you really show them that there is a progression journey for them within the agency. And there's a space at the top, for them as well, if they continue their career in the right way. So yeah, and I'm a big advocate for that. The other thing which I picked up on there as well, when you were talking about the fact that you had a boss that allowed you just to get on with them. We talk a lot about how agencies need to build trust with their clients, but I see the same thing back internally as well.
100%.
Leadership need to trust their teams. They are the ones that know their clients the best. They are the ones that, if they are saying this is not the right time to do that, they're not in a position for us to push them for more products and services that, I know I've spoken to them, there's a redundancies coming, or, actually they've just told me that they're opening up or creating a new product. There's going to be some work over here, but give me a couple of months to scope it out some more and we can revisit it. They have to start listening to the people on the ground, because they are the ones that know the best, and allow them, as you said, allow them to make those mistakes, allow them to go through that process, because you're not going to do it again. If you make a mistake along the way, and it's the only way you learn, in my opinion, it's the way you learn is to sort of be thrown in the deep end, get stuck in, and teams will be so much stronger if you take that process.
Yeah, and if you don't, I've had managers in my career who are micromanaging, and it's so uncomfortable to be in that position. You're like, I just want to do my job, and I know you want to know that I'm doing my job, but you're not doing your job because you're spending all your time trying to make me do my job. And actually, that's a massive trust thing. If you can instill that in the right way and have people who learn to report up proactively, then everyone kind of breathes a bit of a sigh of relief and gets on and does what they're supposed to do, rather than checking on what everyone else is supposed to be doing. But I've been in a situation once where I was an operator of an account. So I was the one who knew them really, really well. And there was an opportunity for a business development opportunity for a big project, which would have been massive for our agency. And I managed to get the opportunity for us to pitch for this piece of work, which was at the time quite exciting. And I was like, whoa, I'm operating above my station. And I was part of the team who pulled this thing together. And someone who was more senior to me, who didn't know the team, I said, we really need to do X, Y, Z. And there was something on the financials, which I knew of the nature of this client, they really would have wanted to see they're real detail people. And the person who had the decision on putting this pitch together and going to pitch it was like, no, it's too much. It's too much information. That's in a project plan. That's in a project budget, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so we went in, we pitched the business. We didn't get it for that reason. They loved our creative. They loved our people, but they didn't feel comfortable enough that we'd nailed the financials. So I was like, oh, I'm so frustrated. But that's just an illustration of, and from their side, they were trying to do, what they have done in the past in that scenario with people in the same business, but different divisions or whatever it might have been. And they felt that it was just complete overkill. But I was passionate that I knew the people who were making the decision on this piece of business. So from then, you all learn, don't you? And you kind of go on to do other stuff. But that's a definite thing. It has to be respected that, when you've got operators who really know the client, they should be empowered to be part of that, longer term picture. And also there'll be people, if they're really good and they care, who come up with ideas and solutions, which then that's only going to make the agency look good because they can deliver better for that client and also potentially use those solutions on other pieces of business, whether it's, a different industry or a different client within the same industry. So yeah, that whole kind of multi-level approach is super important. And when agencies get that right, then they're pretty robust.
Definitely. And funny enough, I was talking about this with someone else yesterday, talking about different departments as well, understanding really the value of client services as well. And that because they are so involved in their client and their business, that actually when it comes to things like strategy and creative, that they really do have a voice, that they really do have insights, which is relevant. They might come up with creative concepts, which, I know that creatives generally are like, that's not your job, but they know the client so well. They understand what they want and are expecting to see. And I think agencies really need to start to understand that or learn that it's a collaboration internally, that client services shouldn't be seen as, that's why I don't really like the term delivery team. They shouldn't be seen as just the conduit between the clients and the other departments, that they are strategic, that they really do know their clients so well, so that when they come back saying, that's not what the client's going to want to see, or I don't think that's going to hit the mark, or I don't feel that's on brand, that feedback is absolutely valid.
Yeah. And it's quite a difficult position to be, in a client services role. You're just piggy in the middle. So you're kind of keeping people from either side and trying to keep them all happy. And that can be very stressful. But like you say, when you're in that situation, those are the people who know they are the middle person. So they really know how to compromise and how to get it right and how to make a fit. And yeah, exhausting, really, really stressful job.
It is. It's hard. It's hard being in a client services role. So you touch everything. You touch every part of the business. You have to keep your client happy. You have to be the voice of the client internally. You need to keep your teams happy. It's all whilst being commercial at the same time. It's a really challenging role, but it's also super, super exciting. So let's just take a view back into when you were client side again. And because I really want to try and get some of those sort of, real nitty gritty bits out of you, that those frustrations that you had with agencies. So those agencies listening right now that might go, oh God, I think I probably do that. What are some of the things that really bug you when working with an agency?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a big one. I think we've talked about the financials, haven't we? And kind of we've talked about coming to a compromise and not going, oh yeah, they don't know that, they don't need that service, we'll just whack it in. Or, it's honesty and trust and being open. But I think, operationally, day to day, slow response times are a massive bugbear. An agency should be agile, and that doesn't mean they have to answer the phone at 10 o'clock in the evening. But I've worked with agencies who are trying to scale and they just don't have enough people. So they've committed to a piece of business and you're like, you're not there for me. I need you right now. Especially when you work in events, there's all sorts of stuff that comes up all the time. Even if your event's in a year or 18 months time, it's be able to pounce on stuff really quickly. And I think, if you've got agencies who are like, oh, let's have a call about that, and let's have 5 emails to find a time to have a call about that, actually it's just a complete buzzkill. And you're like, I'm just trying to do my job, and I want you to be with me on this and helping. So I think those kind of behaviours that often, again, we talked about this earlier, come from the leadership and being commercial. I've been in a situation where I needed something done really urgently. I was that middle person, the client services, I guess, person for a client who was very not needy, but just really high maintenance. That's probably doing them a disservice. They wanted stuff done yesterday, and they had something that needed doing, and it was really urgent, and I couldn't do it. This other agency had to deliver on that piece because they were the specialists. And this agency didn't seem to appreciate the situation I was in that I'm getting screamed at for something that I can't actually do myself. And this agency were like, well, we need to get a quote for that, and that can come back tomorrow. And actually, it was a 10-minute job, but they were being so unhelpful because they felt that the project was clearly more than they could deliver. They'd bitten off a bit more than they could chew. So I think, part of getting that right is the, onboarding, all of that whole piece at the very beginning. How do you work? What does this look like? What's this scenario? If this happens, how are we going to handle it? And part of that responsibility comes from the person who engages with that agency to have those conversations. And I find if you don't have those conversations, possibly because you don't know you have to have them because you haven't been through a bump like this before, like, I've got that experience, but not everyone does, then you wouldn't have those conversations. And then you'd be knee deep in a project, and all of a sudden it becomes really difficult because that agency operates in a different way, and actually you just need pace, and you'll sort the paperwork out later, or you'll sort the POs out later, or whatever whatever that looks like. So yeah, that's one thing for sure. I think, again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you're a client, you know your business, you know your product really, really well. So I find often agencies love to chat. I love to chat, but it's that pointless chat when you actually just need to crack on, and it's finding the time. There are always moments where you need to have relaxed, informal chats with your customers, your clients, whatever, to get to build that relationship. But there are also times on calls, for example, video calls, where you just need to crack on, get through what's required, whiz through the agenda, get your decisions and move on with your day. And actually, if you have, a really fluffy agency who just wants to talk and you're under pressure as a client person, then actually that's a massive turn off, because you're like, I know you want to be my friend, but also we have a job to do. So can we just, get on with the pace? They're kind of probably tied in together a bit. Another one is over promising. If you've got an agency who's like, oh yeah, we can do blah, 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 and then actually when it comes down to it, they can't, then can be a very frustrating emotion to go through, because you may have chosen an agency in a pitched scenario and your expectation is that they're gonna give you all these great new ideas, but actually when it comes down to it, they're not there, or it's too slow, or could be lots of other things to think about. What else have I got? I think one big one, which actually I've experienced in the last 2 or 3 weeks working with an agency on behalf of a client. Again, we've talked about this a bit earlier. You've got your operators who, so I've got a really good relationship on behalf of my client, with an operator at an agency. She's brilliant. She really knows her shit. She cares. She's wonderful. But the leadership, not on the same page. So she's in a really difficult position because she's trying to do a good job and service us well. And she absolutely is. However, it's quite difficult to work with that agency simply because it's quite fractious. And when we have a meeting with the leadership person, as a client, me and my client, we don't really feel hugely loved or respected or valued as a customer. But that's so different between who we actually work with. So there's a real do we want to continue working with them? Because we do, because that person's great. But then if they leave, what does that look like? And so I think sometimes you get that polarization between whether it's your commercial person, your finance person, your accounts person chasing an invoice, for example, and being like a terrier, which it may not even be due, or there may be a reason that that's not been settled. And that can then trickle down and have a real impact on the people who are actually doing the work on that project. So I think those are all of those pieces come back to relationship, right? Every single time they come back to relationship and clear communication and being honest and transparent with what you can deliver. And if you say you're going to do something, just do it. Like, there's a chap I've had the pleasure of working with who's done incredibly well in property and all sorts. And he said, Jess, I just don't get it. It's not that hard. Like, if you say you're going to do something, just do it. There's so many people in business. I said to him, what's your main rule to live by? How have you been so successful? And he's like, when I say I'm going to do something, I just do it. And it's as simple as that. And everything he talks about comes back to that. So I think there's a lot to be said from an agency. Say you're going to do something, do it, and don't fluff about too much if you don't need to.
Yeah. That's that piece around over promising, though, isn't it? That's that piece around the reason why they don't do it is because they've said that they're going to do something which they probably actually can't do, and then they're fluffing around it because they are trying to get out of what they've said that they were going to do and can't actually do it. But the thing which I picked up there, which I thought was a really good point, actually, Jess, was the different ways of communicating throughout the business to the client. And for me, I'm such a massive advocate for this, having a client-centric culture within an agency. You cannot have situations like you're saying there where people are interacting with your clients and they're not feeling the same warmth as they feel from the person that you're dealing with every single day. And I've seen it in agencies, and it is my biggest bugbear that I have is when I see, especially after things like feedback calls, where everyone gets together and they get a big group and they just client bash. And they client bash and they say that the client's wrong, and that they shouldn't do that, and that, we're right. And it feeds this sort of negative mindset towards the client. So that, of course, what's going to happen when you get into a meeting with them, you're going to talk like that. You're going to be annoyed with them. And it's so hard as the client services person to be able to sort of sit there and get everyone to stop and take your emotions out of this. Your feelings are not part of this. This is your client feeding back what they want. And we as an agency need to look at this from a strategic point of view and respond strategically, not emotionally to it. And I think that if you have an agency that's embedded in them, where their mindset is always, it's not this whole clients are always right. It's not taking everything so personally and never allowing client bashing.
Yeah, I would agree. And actually, another kind of hat that I've worn is obviously with my husband, his business, we run events of our own, and there have been scenarios where we've had customer-facing events that we've spent years and years building a brand for, with very little budget probably, but just that brand is what everyone hangs their hat on, and the profitability of that event is hung on the brand. Yet the customer-facing piece, we've got lots of people. If you think of a festival, you've got the people you see when you first walk in and get your ticket scanned, the people at the F&B jobby, the people online before when you book your tickets. If one of those is sharp with you or a bit negative or a bit aggy towards you, your perception as a customer is like, oh, I'm not interested. And actually that kind of brand building is such a huge piece of work for pretty much every business, whether you're B2B or B2C, that one interaction can have such a massive negative impact. So that has to really, this is agency side, this is talking much more widely now, that customer service piece, that customer facing is huge, and it has to be done in the right way. Yes, you get customers who are tricky or clients who are tricky or push you, but it's being professional and polite and, non-emotional is super important when you're in those positions of potential conflict. And it's a real skill for people to be able to turn that around. Some people have that skill, and generally people in events are full of that skill set because it's a people business. People in marketing are generally full of it. But, you find some people who are new into their career, who are plonked in a customer facing delegate inquiries, for example, or if they can't get that right, the impact is massive and a much bigger
reputation, isn't
yeah,
it?
it
It's
is.
the reputation.
Yeah, it is. So that all again comes down to leadership and how the structure and how that's embedded at the beginning and onboarding from staff, clients, the whole shebang. So yeah, got lots more podcast ideas.
Yeah, I know. It's like little branches going off everywhere at the moment. Look, Jess, I think, to be honest, that we could keep on talking for ages about this. We could go on and on, but I want to wrap it up. But we have a tradition on this podcast where we ask, or I ask, I should say, those to share a war story of working with an agency, or maybe you were working at the agency at the time, and kind of what could have been done better to prevent the situation from getting to the point that it did.
Okay, so so many stories to choose from. Okay, I'm going to go with one. So I was working agency side for an end client. Okay, so they had a massively complicated series of events all over the place within quite a short time span. For our agency, it was a huge project, massive fee, big flagship thing. We totally knew we could deliver it, but we had all the people, but we possibly hadn't delivered something as complex as that before. So we were slightly in that position of, yeah, we'll just say yes and we'll kind of work it out later. That kind of entrepreneurial vibe, which was really exciting since being part of that whole, it's an exciting kind of new-ish thing, but we know we've got everyone to do it. Anyway, so year one, we did everything in-house, because we wanted to use those experts who we knew would smash everything out of the park. They were brilliant. They were committed. They cared. They'd worked their way up from the bottom. They knew our business inside and out, really skilled, etc. So we had a core team of people who kind of led on different elements. One of those elements was the web development for this series of events. And, I remember going in out of the first meeting and all of us were like, we're going to have to answer our phones, aren't we, till probably like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night for about 6 months, because that's just the nature of this beast. And we were all quite up for it and quite energized by it. And that was fine. And, happy to do it at that stage of our life. Not sure if I'd do that again right now, but we'll see. So we got through it, and it was very much, I look back and I'm like, some of that was so to the wire. It was scary. But the relationship with the client, we were all learning. It was scary for them as well, working with a new agency. And it was fabulous. Learnt loads, absolutely brilliant. Year two, we all recognised that whole, that piece, along with other pieces, were a bit more stressful and a bit more pressured than they needed to be. So the decision was taken to outsource that element to another agency. So there we were, the agency who were the conduit between the client and another agency. So we were almost client side, I suppose, in a weird kind of way. That agency were so out of their depth. It was unreal. There were all sorts of errors. Things went wrong. And we were in the middle being shouted at. And actually, at that time, we were like, if we hadn't have outsourced this, it would have been fine. But the elements that the client was like, we want to do this. So we did what we thought was the right thing. But actually, engaging with that agency, I wasn't even part of that piece. I was told, these are the people who we're working with. So I think, again, to your point earlier that we talked about earlier, the operators who really know their shit should be involved in the agency selection, because actually there's no way on the planet I would have put my vote to go with that specific agency. It was horrific. We all fell out. It was awful. We didn't look good. We got through it, but it was, we went in and worked over the weekends to do work that this agency was not capable of doing because they'd overstretched, because we wanted to make sure that our client was happy and that we delivered on what we promised. There was just too much pressure. So I think my learning from that is probably, it's a luxury when you're an old codger like me and you worked in the industry for ages. You have lots of different people you've worked with, and those ones that you love and trust and their capabilities, etc. Working with new people, my learning is give them a test event, give them a test project, give them something that is not too meaty, just to get, if you can, to get that working relationship going and see how it goes, because from one project you can very clearly see how every other project's going to go. But I think for this one, we were in the situation where we had to dive in and give this agency a huge piece of business, and actually we'd never worked with them before, and they said, yeah, we can do this, we're great, and they couldn't, and that was really, really testing. But then we've all learned a lot. I think they learned a lot, they, as well, and their capabilities now are probably hugely different to what they were, certainly now. This project was a while ago, but before they delivered. So when you get your people who you work with, whether you're client side or agency side, whatever, that's quite difficult to disrupt. So it's just getting that first piece and testing the waters. It's like a friendship, isn't it? It's like a relationship. It's you don't go, oh, I met you yesterday, let's get married.
Yeah, I think some of that comes down to what we talked about before, though, is about agencies being honest as well about what they can and can't do. I totally understand that an agency would want to push themselves, but if you're going to push yourselves beyond what you think that you're capable of doing, have the right resources and backup to be able to know that you can fulfill on what you're saying, rather than hoping that it'll be okay and you can learn on the job. Because, as you say, there was other reputations involved here. There was your reputation involved, and you have to think like that. Reputation is everything in the world that we live in, especially now more than ever. You don't want to be going into something where people are going, oh, I would never use them again because, they promised something and that they didn't deliver on it. So it's a learning for agencies to be honest, be transparent, and make sure that you've got the support. And if you need to get extra resource to fulfill something that you've overpromised on, then do it, but don't let your clients down in the process.
And I think, my final bit on this is some of the best agencies I've worked with are quite small, and when they've been in a situation that they've been given a piece of business, they're so outwardly excited by it. And they're like, this is amazing. We really want to work with you long term. We're going to show you what we can do. We're going to, yes, you've given us a little bit of business, but we're going to do it really well. And let's hope that we'll get some more business from you. They always do, with that attitude. And if they price themselves properly, then commercially for them, brilliant long term as well. I never advocate for someone or an agency racing to the bottom to win a piece of business on price, to then, upsell to where they think they should be. Because long term, that's just going to piss off your client, because actually you priced it at a certain level. So it's a real balance of value. But for me, I love doing what I do. And when I work with positive people, it's a joy.
Yeah. And they should be celebrated and encouraged to keep going. Anyway, Jess, this conversation has been fantastic. I think we might need to split this into 2 podcasts, but that's never a bad thing. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. I've loved it, and I think you're right. I think there's loads of offshoots that we could probably pick up at another time and delve into it, deeper. But I really hope that those that are listening have some big good takeaways from this. And even, I always say, even if it's a case of just benchmarking yourself against what clients really think, or maybe you've sort of thought to yourself, actually, maybe I need to think about the way that we approach things with clients, or how leadership work with the teams, or, a client-centric culture, or, all the other things that we've talked about. So thank you so much, Jess. I really appreciate it. And I will definitely see you soon. Pleasure.